Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching fifth and final part of What If Naruto Was the Heir of an Unknown Goddess. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Space, the vastness referred to as the final frontier, is a black cloth dotted with the light of far off stars. Huge and boundless in every direction, it was home to innumerable lifeforms, many of which were unaware of anything around them. The Jerai Empire, a conglomeration of worlds the size of several galaxies that stretched from one end of the universe to the other, was located within this region. Numerous races, some of which were humanoid and others not, called it home. The planet Jerai was at the center of the empire, circling a massive blue sun. The planet Jerai itself was larger than most, appearing from the outside to be a mixture of blue and green, encircled by two rings. But a closer look would show that those rings were man-made. Rather than being a group of stray rocks, they looked to be wooden in origin, composed of a series of panels that connected and encircled the planet diagonally. Several of the greatest scientific minds in the empire lived in these colonies. As the home of the Jiraiya's military power, which included both soldiers and tree ships, it served as the planet's first line of defense. But they were also the home of billions of people from all walks of life and a wide range of professions. On the outside, though, things were a little different on Jerai. The Jerai itself, with its thick forests, undulating grasslands, rivers, hills, and mountain ranges, appeared nearly pristine. This theme was only disrupted in the capital because it wasn't broken there either. Numerous farms at the city's southern periphery produced goods for the city as well as for export. The gleaming sea lay to the east of the capital, and there was a town there that had been established on the coast thousands of years ago as a tiny fishing village but had since expanded in both size and scope. The vineyards to the west produced wine, of course, which has developed into one of the world's major exports. On the other hand, the north was unspoiled and wild, which allowed it to develop naturally with vegetation and became essentially a sizable forest area. This was home to many creatures, and beyond that lay a vast area of mountains. Here, in the untamed north, was where the temple was visible. The temple was the newest structure on Jerai, having been covertly commissioned by Queen Funaho upon learning from Lady Seto that her son Yosho was still alive and well. 5 centuries later, the temple served as a sort of secret haven for House Masaki members. A 50-meter long bamboo fence was present even before one arrived at the temple. The temple was obviously inspired by Funaho's sensibilities and, as such, had a Japanese architectural style in addition to an earthly one. It was a 2-story pavilion with a straightforward wabi-sabi wooden design that exudes refinement and a serene simplicity. The temple's structures were constructed in the Shoin Zachary style, a traditional Japanese architectural design frequently found in temples and mansions. A beautiful garden consisting of several ponds, trees, and plants was another feature of the temple. Naruto, or rather, a lot of Narutos, could be seen in this location. Taking any direction revealed different incarnations of the blonde involved in some capacity. One of the buildings had a room full of blondes standing handstand, one finger resting on top of the other. A group was observed reading from various books in another room, and another group was observed hunching over and meticulously making seals on paper in still another room. Another group was observed performing the same thing outside behind the building, but this time they were hanging from tree limbs. 2 figures that were barely more than blurs could be seen in the middle of everything, darting around and occasionally causing tiny shockwaves to rip through the scene. Unexpectedly, one of the figures was propelled backwards and had to recover sufficiently to stand up, even though it had already slid backwards 3 feet and was using its feet to dig trenches before coming to a firm stop. It was discovered that the figure was none other. Masaki Naruto believed he had changed somewhat. His golden blonde hair had grown out to the lower edge of his upper back, and his stature had shot up by half a foot. He was wearing an orange sleeveless shirt that was a bit ragged and blue pants right now. The boy only managed to get his bearings before he yelled in shock and was quickly pulled down until only his head was above the floor by 2 hands that suddenly emerged from the ground, gripping his ankles. A short while later, Jiraiya's figure appeared out of the earth, appearing as though he was rising from a body of water, with dirt cascading off his body in a similar manner. The Sannin smiled and laughed at the scowling blonde. "Not bad, Gaki, you've come a long way from when we first got here," Jiraiya said. This was sufficiently true. A few weeks prior, when they initially arrived at the temple to start his more intensive physical training, his grandmother Miyako had placed some limitations on his physical capabilities. The first involved what she described as chakra bands covering every part of his body, apart from his head, which caused him to topple over and assume a mummy-like posture. With these restrictions in place, he would need to apply just the right amount of chakra to regain full movement. If he applied too little, the pressure binding him would increase, and if he applied too much, he would be immobile. She had explained that she was doing this to help him with his chakra control. He consequently had to learn how to control and maintain 3 output levels in addition to channeling chakra throughout his entire body. It had taken him some time to adjust to moving in this manner, but he was eventually able to expand his range of motion and mobility. She had struck again, applying a gravity seal to his person once he'd recovered to the point where he felt free to move. Because Jerai had less gravity than Furia, she had begun the experiment with a gravity that was 12 times that of Jerai. This was another laborious endeavor because it also needed precise chakra control to prevent the surrounding gravity from growing. He became more patient as a result of being unable to physically force any part of his body to move without endangering himself. Once he had figured it out, he was functioning at a force 20 times that of gravity. In addition to the passive abilities of his special genetic structure from the Uzumaki, Senju, Tatsuki, and Masaki clans, his body was even tougher and could handle a lot more than most shinobi because he was a shinobi with chakra actively circulating his body at all times. In addition, the advantages he had received from being the Kyuubi's container had elevated him far beyond anyone's expectations in terms of what his physical prowess could accomplish. He had been repeatedly pushed past his breaking points, both mentally and physically, over the course of the previous year. If only Jiraiya were to acknowledge it, having this location to train the brat was a blessing since it had allowed them to really let their hair down and push him further than he could have possibly gone in the elemental nations. Furthermore, there was nothing in the area to divert them from moving forward, so having Miyako Sensei nearby was really helpful because she was there with the knowledge of what to do where he would normally stumble. Jiraiya was man enough to acknowledge that his original idea had been misguided at this point, and that his original plan to gradually acclimate the child to using the Biju chakra had been swiftly vetoed for this current track. He had never seen anything like Naruto's drive and his potential was just enormous. Using the clones, they had taught him ninjutsu, fuinjutsu, and remedied his lack of genjutsu. Even though he would never be proficient in genjutsu, they had taught him how to spot their signs and counter them. The real Naruto concentrated on improving his physical attributes, such as strength and speed, and refining his taijutsu beyond what Kakashi had taught him, while the clones took care of everything else. Still, you've got a long way to go before you can beat me, Gaki, Jiraiya said, glancing down at the blonde, to which the blonde shot up a smirk and burst into smoke, revealing it to be a clone. Reigun. He heard the shouted word and spun around in time to witness the blonde unleash a tremendous power burst. Quickly calculating in his head, he realized the object had to be at least 14 feet in diameter and was traveling quickly. Fewer people would have the courage to attempt to block something similar, and the majority would find it difficult to avoid such a beast. But Jiraiya was not an ordinary person. He belonged to the Sannin and was known as the Toad Sage. He was a living legend who was a contender to become the 4th and 5th Hokage. In addition, he had gained a great deal from his time on Jerai, not the least of which was the use of the life water, which had allowed him to return to his former physical state. As it got closer, he planted his feet and coated his hands with chakra. He managed to catch it and hold onto it long enough to propel it upwards like a rocket. He turned to face Naruto, who was staring between him and the disappearing dot that was his blast in disbelief, his eyes wide. Good try, Gaki, but you've still got a ways to go before you can beat me. The catatonic blonde, who was now staring between his finger and the Sannin in shock, was met with a sly grin from the Sannin. That's enough. As Miyako approached, still looking older despite being back on Jerai, her distinct voice caught both of their attention. Go get cleaned up and don't forget to dispel the clones in intervals. Without responding, Naruto just continued to stare at his finger as though he was unaware of what had happened. Until the boy vanished into the temple and the doors shut behind him, the two adults stayed behind. Jiraiya lost his cool instantly, shaking his hands as if they were on fire and falling to his knees. That was incredibly reckless of you. Miyako spoke up, grabbing one of his arms and putting her own hand over his, radiating green energy and healing chakra. I didn't think it would eat through my own chakra so quickly. Jiraiya said. He has a stronger chakra than we do. Over 10 years of it combining with his own power has had an impact, even though he didn't intentionally mix it with the foxes. Miyako said. Well, that was certainly impressive. Came a voice breaking the silence over the room as the screen displaying these events was closed. The speaker was revealed to be a woman that appeared to be in her late 20s or perhaps early 30s. She had golden brown skin with short-cut blonde hair and blue eyes. Though she was sitting, she had a pair of long legs covered by black stockings that led up to what appeared to be a white leotard with a window left open to expose a rather tantalizing view of her chest. This woman was none other than Mikami Kuramitsu, the head of the Galaxy Police Academy. Normally appearing as a stern older woman in her middle ages, as she was now off the clock, she'd taken the opportunity to let her hair down as the saying goes and was currently free of her illusion and had a bottle of sake open which she was sipping from contentedly. Also present in the room were her two closest friends, Lady Seto and Irie, the three women known collectively as the Three Great Princesses, the three women who were the forces behind the three most powerful factions in the universe. Seto of course represented the Imperial House of Jerai, Mikami represented the Kuramitsu family, which was the second most powerful force in the universe, and Irie, who while unknown to even her own people represented the third most faction, the Faith of the Chosen, alternatively known as the Three Lives Church, based off of the planet Jerai and the daughter of its high priest. Indeed, and to think power like that had been just sitting on a backwater planet at the edge of the universe. Said Seto. It wasn't that bad, certainly underdeveloped, but it's nowhere near what I feared it would be. Said Funaho, joining the conversation by way of another screen. Yet, she's still correct, the planet is a backwater, one we'd have completely ignored if not for the transmission of the Yosho. Oh. Said Masaki, also joining the conversation by screen, in fact the same screen as her sister. Wife. Speaking of, how are things there? Questioned Mikami. Things are well. The second exam has just concluded, so the run-up to the tournament will be starting. Said Funaho. Oh, any names to look forward to? Questioned Irie. Many of Naruto's friends have advanced to the tournament, Sakura and Hinata among them. Said Masaki. That's the cousin, right? Questioned Mikami. Yes, Miyako. Chan's granddaughter. Said Masaki. She stayed behind as she had only recently been taken as an apprentice. Said Funaho. Girls, I need you to set up a relay so that we can contact Sunade. Said Seto. At this, Mikami raised an eyebrow in curiosity. In truth, while she was a bit curious, they'd never really spoken in depth about Seto's time on Furia. They'd spoken about Naruto and Miyako quite a bit, but never really about the planet and its workings nor the people there. As such, she reasoned that it was incredibly likely that her old friend was up to something, but for the time being she figured she'd let it play out and see what happens. A few hours after his latest sparring session, Naruto walking within the colony that circled Jerai. Of course, after his training and subsequent bath, he'd changed up his outfit into something a bit more traditional which would fit better on Jerai. As such, he wore a pair of shinobi-style black Hakuma pants which had something of a billowing effect in the upper of the legs, though the area surrounding the calves was form-fitting. He paired them with shinobi standard bandages which were wrapped around his lower calf beneath his pants and went down, going not just to his ankle but covering everything to the midpoint of his feet. While he didn't need them anymore, he'd been wearing them ever since his surgery over a year ago. Over this, he wore a pair of black shinobi sandals, higher quality than his old wool ones and now made of a combination of leather and cotton, much more durable and as such much more capable of handling the stress of his actions if he had to move quickly. His upper body was covered by an orange kimono top held closed by a black belt, and on his back rested the ancestral sword of the Uzumaki clan, Tenza Zangetsu, the hilt peeking over his right shoulder. At the moment, he could be found walking down a corridor in the military section of the colony. Truthfully, it was more of a science division, but considering the place focused primarily on the design of weapons and ships, it was pretty much controlled by the military. At his side was Tenyo, who despite working for the Galaxy Police directly under Irie was also a very respected member of Jiraiya's weapon development branch and had even been the lead designer on the Kamadake, Seina's first ship. Of course, with this being a science division, it also explained why they walked unbothered, as most people were far too absorbed by their own projects to bother with anyone else, especially those outside of their own teams. Of course, getting into the property in the first place had been a bit of a chore as they'd passed through multiple checkpoints to get this far inside. Of course, it would have been much easier if people knew who they actually were, but seeing as his grandfather was publicly still missing, and his state unknown, none outside of family and the closest of family friends knew he was still alive, much less that he had children, grandchildren and so forth. The same held true for his paternal grandmother Miyako, as her survival had not yet been announced. As such, for the most part they were considered regular citizens of the empire and would not be known as nobility, much less royalty, until the announcements were made. He had no idea when that would happen, though Funaho said it would definitely be before his own wedding and even before Furia's quarantine was lifted and they officially rejoined the empire. Considering all that was going on to make those things happen, he knew it would only be a matter of a couple of years at most. He pushed his thoughts aside as they came to a stop and Tenyo approached a section of the wall where a small screen was located. Naruto watched curiously as she placed her hand on the screen before a green light appeared near the top of the wall, which began to ripple before the center portion of the wall seemed to be pulled apart and a doorway formed, much to his surprise. "What the hell?" exclaimed the boy, getting a chuckle from his cousin, who motioned him to follow her inside. "It's nano tech. Billions of tiny machines which can be programmed for any number of features. In this case they're used for security, and a biometric scan was used for us to get through," said Tenyo. "You can do that?" questioned Naruto in surprise. "Yes, after the attack security was bolstered massively and the nano tech was included. The machines are also self-replicating, and as such it takes some serious power to get through them, especially for something as thick as the walls of this place," explained Tenyo. "I could punch through it," came the dismissive voice of the fox in his head. "I don't doubt that, especially now," mused the boy in return. "There you are, it's about time," called a voice, breaking him from the conversation before it could truly start. Looking around, he found himself in what appeared to be something of a reception area, as there were a few seats and a small table. There was a large window at the back of the room which appeared to be blocked from the other side, a desk for what was probably the receptionist, and another more obvious door. The voice was revealed as Suiren, one of Seina's wives. She was the tallest of them all and had green hair that she let hang freely, with a bit of it framing her face and a pair of dark eyes behind a pair of eyeglasses. Honestly, how Seina was managing to survive having 8 wives was incredibly surprising, despite it all being manipulated by Seto for political aims. "Are we late?" questioned Naruto in return. "Nearly, you are the last to arrive though." "This way," said the woman before turning and motioning them to follow. They didn't have to follow her long, as it was only just as they passed through the newest doorway that they found themselves meeting with some familiar faces. Inside the room were his fellow Jinchuriki, with the notable exceptions of Gaara and Yugara, though both could be seen on separate screens. To be perfectly honest, he was surprised to see them all, as he'd known they had all left Jerai and most of them had gone back to Furia. The only ones who hadn't gone back initially were Fu and Yugura, though Yugura had eventually gone back to help out his successor in order to finally end the civil war in Kiri. Fu, however, stated she had no intention of going back, and if she did it would never be to Taki, and as such she'd been working as one of Sito's aides for a bit, at least when she wasn't undergoing her own training with his grandmother. Still, he was surprised to see that everyone was here, as he knew for the most part they all had their duties. For the most part he knew they were all some of, if not the top ninja in their respective villages, so unlike his closer friends they had never been meant to stay anyway. His classmates, however, had stayed with him on Jirai, as they all underwent something like group training. All of them, however, had left for the Chunin exams almost 2 months ago, which he knew would be held in Sunade this year. Greeting them all, he was soon pulled into a bit of a group discussion in which they mostly just played catch-up. Despite being from different villages and thus predisposed to hating each other, they all got along pretty well for the most part. None of them could really be called patriotic, as all of them had gotten into the field to improve their lives. Roshi and Han were also as close to retirement as a pair of Jinchuriki could get due to their advanced age, though neither of them looked it, unlike the Tsuchikage who'd been their teammate coming up. "Good, you're all here," came another familiar voice, causing the group to look towards it. Naruto didn't need to, as he'd spent enough time over the last year with Washu to recognize her simply by her voice. Of course, her voice was slightly different in that she was currently in her adult form, something she'd been spending more and more time in over the last year as well. Despite the fact that he didn't need to, however, he still looked. She was dressed a lot more professionally, as she wore a black shirt that went down to just above her knees with a white long-sleeved shirt over which she wore a buttoned-up red vest. Above this she wore an opened lab coat, the top of which did nothing to contain her bust. While not in the same league as Sunade when it came to that particular feature, Naruto felt she still possessed plenty to be proud of in that department. He had to cut his appreciation short, however, as not only were his fellow Jinchuriki in the room, but she'd come in accompanied by Lady Seto, which really shouldn't have been much of a surprise considering all who was here. "Let's get started, shall we?" said Washu, bringing all attention to herself. As all of you know, negotiations are still ongoing between the High Council and the leaders of Furia, began Washu. This was true, mostly because unlike most planets that called the Empire home, Furia had not just one or two leaders but a whole host of them. It was one of the reasons the planet was considered underdeveloped, as its leaders were still all about their own self-interest, and as such there was still not one clear-cut planetary leader. While the 5 Kage were leaders in their own right, it was still only for their respective villages and not the countries as a whole. Because of this, the negotiations, which were usually rather quick, had been dragging out, due mostly to the planetary negotiations that were now ongoing as well. While this issue is a problem, it has very little to do with you all, and quite frankly even the members of the council know they couldn't stop me from doing something if they tried, said Washu. This was something else Naruto knew was true. Washu was not only the greatest scientific mind in the universe, but one of the Chusen, the 3 goddesses that created the universe. While she didn't look the part, he knew that the form she was in now was merely a shell, something she used so that she could live amongst them and not destroy the universe simply by her presence. The other 2 were her sisters Tokimi, who was rarely in this universe, and Tsunami, the patron goddess of Jerai, who the source of both the royal trees and the ancestor of the imperial family was. Tsunami, like Washu, was currently living in this universe and had merged with Sasami due to a deadly accident when she was a baby. Sasami as such was in a similar situation as his mother had been in, and as such it was known, if only to her very close family, that she would one day grow up to become Tsunami. Anyway, over the last year or so I've been working on a project for you. While it's not finished yet and probably won't be for a few years, I figured I'd start you off with these. As she said this, she hit a button and suddenly a new line of screens appeared for them to see, within which they beheld a number of ships, each of them different than the last. Despite this, Naruto found all of them were appealing on the eyes. Looking at the screens, he couldn't help but wonder how many teams had been put together to design and build these, as it was obvious that they couldn't have all come from a single mind. Of course, he recognized his own ship immediately as he'd helped in its design. It had the appearance of a regular star fighter, but he knew it would be much larger and far more powerful than any star fighter could ever hope to be, as it was powered by a first-generation royal tree. Unlike other Jiraiyan ships, however, his exterior was not made of wood. Instead, he'd had Washu implement the same metallic alloy she employed in Ryo. Oki's ship form, which not only made it lighter and more maneuverable but gave its red and black color scheme a glossier appearance. What's the catch? Questioned Roshi, turning away from the screens and looking towards Washu. While I wouldn't have put it so bluntly, you must want something for this. With the exception of Naruto, none of us have a connection to Jirai or anyone off of our own planet, said Yugito. For Haruno, Mebuki life had taken a strange turn over the last year. She'd grown up knowing that there were secrets her mother wasn't sharing, but such was the nature of their world that she hadn't questioned it much. That of course hadn't meant that she wasn't curious. In her youth she'd often wondered about her father, if he'd known about them, if he cared. Her mother had answered those questions in her own way, when she and Minato were still young. Their father had died in an ambush by Kumo shinobi. He'd never known about them but would have loved them. After a while she had put her father out of her mind, but sometimes the faceless ghost would pop up, especially when she married Kazashi. Minato had been there though. He'd offered his support, told her she was pretty, friend Kazashi, and gave her away. Still, she had never suspected that learning her father's identity would result to her current position sitting in an onsen across from Masaki Funaho, Masaki, and Sunade. Spending time with Sunade was something that had become a regular occurrence over the last year. Things had been tense in the beginning, especially when the subject of Naruto had come up. It helped that, like Sunade, she honestly hadn't known about him. Obviously she knew Minato and Kushina were married and knew Kushina was expecting, but like everyone close to the two of them, she'd been informed that their child had died in the Kyuubi attack. If she'd had ever actually seen him before, she'd have easily seen through the lie, but she really didn't get out into the village proper much. She worked in the barrier division and was even the assistant director now, and that reveal had been enough for the Godem Hokage to understand. She'd known of Uzumaki Naruto of course, but it was with the knowledge that the Sandaime had named the boy out of sentiment. So you and Kakashi, how did that happen? The question from Sunade was enough to pull Mebuki from her thoughts. Looking over to Minaho, she could see the woman blushing slightly, though whether that was from embarrassment, the sake, or the water was up in the air. Honestly, I don't know. I would go to check on Naruto and we would talk, sometimes for hours, said Minaho. You should have seen it. They'd take walks around the temple or through the marketplace. It was so cute," said Masaki with a sigh. "It is nice to see you so relaxed and happy. You spend so much time supporting Mother that I feared you would either never find someone or get wrapped up in one of her plots," said Funaho. "Plots?" questioned Mebuki before she could stop herself. "Mother enjoys matchmaking. Actually, it's one of the things she's known for," said Masaki. "Well, that's not so bad," said Mebuki, relaxing. "Maybe not for most. Seto Sama sometimes goes to extremes in her efforts if her targets prove difficult," said Minaho. "Extremes?" questioned Sunade. "Take Sana-san for example. She arranged the marriages between him, Kiriko, Amane, Niju and Ryoko Balta. On their wedding day, Sana was kidnapped by agents of the Renza Federation that had been disguised as Seto's aides. Of course, she knew the entire time who they truly were and used the situation to add them to Sana's collection of brides, effectively bringing the Federation under the influence of Jerai," said Funaho, to the shock of both Tsunade and Mebuki. "You should know she's actually got a few plans with you in mind as well, Tsunade." "San," said Minaho. "She hardly knows me," exclaimed Tsunade. "She knows enough. You are the military leader of a foreign state, the first woman in the history to hold the post. You're legendary for your skill as a healer and a warrior, and you have a body most would kill to have, touch, or both," said Masaki. "Do you know who she has in mind?" questioned Funaho, her tone showing nothing but curiosity. "Right now Jiraiya and Naruto are at the top of the list," said Minaho. "Naruto, he's a child," exclaimed Mebuki. "That won't stop her. She met her husband Utsutsumi when he was 9 years old. She was 4,500. They married 130 years later," said Funaho. "Well, at least she's patient," said Tsunade. "Unless she's bored and wants to make things interesting, in which case I'd suggest you find yourself a husband," said Masaki, causing Tsunade to take a nervous sip from her sake unless she choked. As the meeting wrapped, Naruto felt his mind was sufficiently blown. When he had gotten up that morning, he'd not thought that he'd learn not only the origin of the Biju, but the origin of chakra as a whole, and in truth his home planet's entire society. Washu had started it by informing them that the Biju were not initially separate entities but had started out as one complete being. It was something that he'd definitely never heard before, though Seto revealed it was something that Washu had informed Konoha's council of the day they learned the truth behind the fox's rampage on the village. As if that wasn't enough, however, the Biju themselves had gotten in on the act, urging them to channel a bit of their chakra and create a clone only for miniature Biju to appear before they went further, explaining the knowledge that had been missing. They explained how one day during the Age of Endless War, one of Naruto's ancestors, a woman by the name of Otsutsuki Kagaya, had come to their dimension in search of what they called the Shinju and settled amongst the people, who even then had been powerful, able to use pure spiritual energy they called Reiki for battle, and at that point was in something of a cold war with the three most powerful warriors all vying for control, known collectively as the Three Kings. Kagaya would settle in what was known then as the Land of Ancestors, which played home to the Shinju and had been under the control of the tribe of devils. Apparently even then the man had been dying slowly for some time, as he'd been on a hunger strike for years, and Kagaya had used this weakness to become his mistress. After he died, and in an effort to end the war, Kagaya ate the fruit of the Shinju and its power, which she called chakra, along with a host of abilities including a dujutsu which was the precursor to the Sharingan and far more powerful. Armed with this power, she swiftly brought a level of peace to the land, and within 9 months also gave birth to twin sons Hagoromo and Hamura, who had inherited not only Kaguya's power but their father's, which combined to create an incredibly potent chakra and abilities all their own, none of them prepared for the calamity that would soon be upon them. When the boys had grown and become young men, mysterious attacks began to plague the land as strange creatures began to attack people the world over. Eventually they learned the cause as the Shinju awoke and transformed into a massive beast and began laying waste to entire communities. Kagaya went to stop it, and not only was she defeated by the beast, but she was eaten by it, resulting in it becoming even more powerful. The twins had also tried to engage but would likewise be defeated and only barely escape with their lives due to the sacrifice of their clansmen. For years the beast would rage the world over, chasing the two who, despite multiple defeats, were constantly growing stronger and wiser. They learned much in that time about themselves and their powers, and had even created a new branch of techniques which they called Fuinjutsu. Finally the twins, now truly grown men, confronted the beast with a plan in place, and after a long battle were able to immobilize it. Hagoromo by usage of seals would then split the beast spirit and chakra from its body and seal it into himself, while Hamura sealed the beast body within multiple layers of earth before the duo launched the huge ball into space, where they covered it even further in the remnants of the previously destroyed moon. From there the two brothers split, Hamura and a crew of his own people to live on the new moon and as such stand guard over the creature now known as the Jubi's body. Hagoromo however would stay on Furia and help the people not only rebuild but learn to control the chakra they all now possessed. Near the end of his life, Hagoromo, now known as the Rakudo Sennin, Sage of Six Paths, would begin worrying of the creature's escape with his weakening condition. Because of this he came up with a plan to prevent the creature's return by splitting its power into separate pieces which took their own forms, becoming the Biju the world knew of currently. Needless to say, this news had left all of them reeling but also feeling a newfound level of responsibility for the power they held. Washu had quickly followed this up, stating she was not surprised as the fruit was not meant to be eaten by anyone save the Chosen. What should have happened was once it was fully ready the fruit would fall from the tree and fall to the ground, enriching the planet as a whole as its power sank to its core before spreading out from there. The tree itself would have continued to sleep, and every 1,000 years or so the process would repeat itself, making the planet stronger until the tree moved on to the next planet and the process started again. What about these bloodline limits? How did they come about? Questioned Seto in curiosity. Well, the Byakugan is the original and is what Kaguya and members of the Otsutsuki possess naturally. When she gained her chakra, a new dujutsu was formed that was called the Rinne Sharingan. The chakra also gave her the ability to manipulate the elements and use her bones as weapons. Said the Nibi. Our father and Hamura of course inherited these abilities, if not as powerful. Hamura for instance inherited the Byakugan and Kaguya's bone manipulation. His descendants would go on to form both the Hyuga and Kaguya clans. Said the Gobi. Father's abilities passed on a bit differently. He also inherited a dujutsu from Kaguya called the Rinnegan, one that to my knowledge has not materialized again since. Said the Yanbi, sitting back with its arms crossed. Father had 3 human children however, and each inherited something from him. His eldest Indra unfortunately inherited his eyes and chakra and soon enough awoke the Sharingan. Stated the Sanbi. Thus the Uchiha clan. Said Washu, frowning. Exactly. The problem is like his descendants, Indra was not only naturally gifted but he was a dick with an elitist mentality. Said Shukaku from the screen. The brat actually tried to use his eyes to take control of the fox once, something his entire line is suffering for. Said Yanbi. Oh, what did you do? Questioned Seto. I tied a curse into his chakra. By that point he'd mastered his Sharingan to their maximum, however after that the more he used the eyes he found he would slowly go blind. Not only him but any of his descendants who successfully awoke it would suffer the same fate. Said the fox. Isn't that a little extreme? Questioned Yugito, frowning. No, I tied it to its full power stage, the Mangekyo Sharingan as they now call it. I also changed the way they activate it, as if they wish to activate it now it would require a specific sacrifice, the death of a loved one. Said Kurama. Upon which point they would deserve their fate for seeking the power in the first place. Said Seto in understanding. Exactly. As for the other 2, the next was Asura, who was the opposite of Indra in just about every way. The kid here actually takes after him now that I think about it. Said the fox, one of his tails pointed up at Naruto. Really? Said Naruto in surprise. Yes, you're both talent. Less idiots. The fox said, making a lot of people snort, while Naruto gave it a fierce look. Asura was a pretty nice person to be around and he seemed to collect friends easily. The Nibi said, drawing attention to herself in the room. Since he inherited his father's body and life force, it took some time for his powers to fully manifest. In comparison to others, he possessed far more physical strength and endurance. The Senju were later founded by his family. The two-tailed cat was finished. So the Senju and Uchiha are connected. Wait. But they've always hated each other, exclaimed Roshi. That is a tale best told at a later date. I have no desire to engage in that caliber of human foolishness. The Yanbi said. Next was Kano, the youngest of the father. She had no interest in learning how to fight, in contrast to her brothers. Although she followed her father's instructions, she wasn't particularly interested in what she learned, but nothing ever really could. Compared to the boys, Kano inherited more from her father because she possessed not only his life force but also his chakra and mind. Her interest was in the practice of fuinjutsu. Naturally, her lineage came to be known as the Uzumaki. The Rokubi said. As for how those other bloodlines came about, she's already told you how. With his tail pointing idly toward Washu, the fox said. Seto asked, is there anything else we should know? No, we've covered all the ground we needed to. Additionally, you have company. Before all of the mini Biju dispelled their cloned bodies, the fox said. As soon as this was said, the door opened to let Noik in. She moved fast to approach her adoptive mother and started to whisper passionately in her ear. When she was done, Seto arched an eyebrow before a small smile crept onto her lips. Suiren, dear, called Seto, causing the woman with green hair to come in through the partially open door. Could you please bring our friends to their ships here? We seem to have some family matters to attend to as well, declared Seto. Of course, this way please. Suiren spoke before heading out of the room, followed by all the Jinchuriki save Naruto, and shutting the door behind them. So it seems Yosho and Irie have decided to marry. When they were alone, Seto said. Tenyo was shocked and exclaimed, wait, really? Why now? Inquired Naruto, looking equally shocked. Naturally, there was cause for surprise. Even though his grandparents reconnected and spent centuries together, they had never been legally married. Although they were deemed married by common law, their union was not the same as a legal union. Well, it helps that Irie has established herself and he's officially been missing for over 700 years. Declared Washu. Marriage now certainly wouldn't hurt her, she's very well known and no one would even think to question her credibility. Tenyo said. It would also keep anyone else from trying to lay a claim on him when the announcement is made. Declared Noik. All right, we can discuss that later. We still have tasks to complete. Declared Seto. Since Naruto was genuinely unsure of how much more he could take, he found himself reluctantly trailing the women out of the office. There were other places where a figure was sitting on the mattress of a small bunk, his back to the wall. He sat motionless as he could, several cuts and bruises slowly healing, and a second figure placed glowing palms over his body. Honestly, Sasuke. Kun, I don't know why you insist on doing this to yourself. Says Yakushi Kabuto, the healer, who was none other than Uchiha Sasuke, the patient, didn't say anything or even open his eyes. Actually, Kabuto was not shocked because the young Uchiha hardly ever communicated, at least not with him. Orochimaru. Sama said that by getting in the way of the boy and Naruto Kun's fight, he had damaged the boy's pride as a warrior. Observing their battle, he was actually impressed by the degree of strength the two boys, who were still in their first year of shinobi, possessed. During the battle, Sasuke was able to fully develop his Sharingan, but Naruto was still able to not only keep up with him but surpass him. Additionally, Sasuke had wielded the cursed seal with an expertise that had surpassed anything he had ever heard of before, and he had used it to deliver a devastating blow to the Chidori. Any other person would have been severely crippled by it. All it seemed to do for Naruto was irritate him since he had started channeling the Kyuubi's chakra, which had allowed him to start hurling Sasuke around like a ragdoll and greatly improved both his physical characteristics and chakra presence. In addition, he had displayed a very nasty set of claws that he had used to rip gouges out of the statues of Madara and Hashirama. Naruto actually froze in place until he started laughing and making fun of Sasuke's appearance. Sasuke had actually thought that would be enough when he revealed his second-level cursed seal form. But when the fighting broke out again, the two had made their earlier efforts look like a light sparring match because every blow they took, even the ones that missed, damaged the surrounding area. He had intervened when the two, now in their regular forms and obviously exhausted, were barely able to stand after clashing the Chidori against the Rasengan. He had risen from the earth behind Naruto, crippling his leg, then quickly picked up Sasuke, knocking him unconscious and running away. As he emerged from his memory, blinking a few times, he discovered that Sasuke's injuries were finally healing, meaning he would be finished in a few minutes at most. He knew that Orochimaru Sama would throw the boy back into the pit for more fighting, even though the day wasn't even over yet. After finishing the task and exiting the room, Sasuke did nothing more than close his eyes and start a breathing technique he had heard about as a child but had never used. I can't believe you fell for that load of crap. You really are stupid. Itachi detested violence. He couldn't have done it all to see how strong he was. If that's the case, then why hasn't anyone heard from him since that evening? According to the bingo book, there hasn't been even one sighting. For the second time, Sasuke's eyes narrowed and his teeth tightened as he remembered Naruto's words from their battle. What made matters worse was that the more he detached himself from the situation's emotions and considered it objectively, the more the blonde's statements made sense. I owe your brother a great deal, and our mothers were good friends who hoped we would be best friends. So be it if paying back that debt requires me to take care of your stupid ass. Looking back, it hurt that he had so little knowledge of his mother's life. He was aware of some personal details about her, but he was unaware of her teammates, friends, or area of expertise. He recalled his father angrily complaining that his son, who was Anbu, had been reduced to the role of a glorified babysitter. He would learn the truth in due course, but not before continuing to fortify himself. He was getting better slowly but surely, but fighting continuously like this without using his Sharingan was difficult and frequently resulted in him taking a beating. He would eventually gain enough strength to confront Itachi when the time came, and he would be prepared. Naruto woke slowly, his body feeling a level of comfort and relaxation that he had come to enjoy immensely. A shifting at his side had him glancing over to see Hana turning over to burrow herself into him. He could feel her breast pressing into him but could also tell she was wearing a shirt as he didn't feel bare skin. Glancing over to the clock on the wall revealed that it was nearly 8 in the morning, meaning he'd slept in. Normally this isn't something that he would do, but he was currently on something of a vacation, so it was actually encouraged. Getting out of the bed, he took a moment to take a glance back at Hana before leaving the room. Nearly 45 minutes later, he was stepping out of the door of the house and taking a deep breath of the country air. They were currently staying with his grandfather on Earth in the Masaki Shrine located in Okayama, Japan. While Tenchi's house wasn't far, it was decided they would stay at the shrine as it had more free space than Tenchi's place had available. Naruto felt like this had turned out to be a good decision as it gave all 6 of his hounds and Hana's triplet Ninken enough room to run around freely. Already it had been just over 2 months since they had arrived, and in that time coming to the temple had been proven the right choice many times over. He was going through his morning stretches when the hounds made their appearance. Patting them all on the head, he was greeted by all of them affectionately before they were off for their morning warm-up run. When they returned to the front, it was to the sight of the rest of his group up and doing stretches of their own. Hinata had returned after the exams through which she'd earned her Chunin rank. From what she'd told him, all of their friends had passed the second time through. Now 14, Hinata had done some growing, which was quite noticeable as not only had she grown in height and started growing her hair out, her body had started filling out as well. She was currently wearing a blue kunoichi dress with the Hyuga clan symbol on the back and spandex shorts. Of course, where she went, her little sister Hanabi wasn't far behind, and he found himself laughing when she ran to him and leapt at him for a hug upon spotting him. He knew the only reason the little girl was allowed to come was because her father had convinced his grandmother to train her alongside Hinata. Regardless, he saw something of a little sister in Hanabi and had grown to be very protective of the girl. Hana was the oldest of the girls from Konoha at 20. She was dressed in a pair of shorts and a vest that was similar to a Chunin flak jacket. Her brown hair was in its customary ponytail, and spotting his eyes on her, she gave a sensual lick of her lips before winking at him with a smirk. She shook his head. The Inuzuka heiress had been teasing him as if it was a game since they'd first left Furia, and with his awakened libido, he didn't know how much more of that he could take. His bodyguard Yugo was of course present as well, and like Hana, she wore a pair of gray shorts and a vest while her purple hair was set in a bun at the top of her head. She had a pair of senbon holding her hair in place, and he was pretty sure she had a host of other weapons sealed on her person. Then there was Sakura, who was joining him for a stretch while Sunade and Jiraiya were on their honeymoon. His cousin had changed a lot since the last time he'd seen her. Training under Sunade had definitely done her a lot of good. She put on some weight and was now covered in compacted muscle. Her pink hair was still short, and though she hadn't grown much in height, there were some curves on her now. The final member of the group was his cousin Tenyo, who was also the eldest at 80, though she definitely didn't look it. She wore a pair of workout pants but wore the same vest as the others. He knew the vests were weighted, but considering the gravity seal and other seals on his person, saw no reason to add to that. After the morning greetings were out of the way, the group was off running at a light sprint, which for most would have been a pure sprint. They were no longer surprised that Tenyo could keep pace with them at this speed, as her Jiraiyan heritage was clearly displayed. They reached the Masaki house within 10 minutes and were greeted by Tenchi and Ryo. Oki, who were returning from their morning farming duties with a range of fruits and vegetables on hand. Ryo. Oki had a hug for everyone, though Tenchi settled with a simple, "good morning," and a smile, which was good for everyone except Tenyo, who marched over to give her brother a hug, causing him to blush. Of course, the relationship between Tenchi and Tenyo was complicated, as Tenchi was only 18 and Tenyo was in her 80s. If that wasn't enough, Tenyo had played substitute to their mother for Tenchi for a time after she passed, and as such was sometimes a very mothering big sister. Entering the house, they found Sasami and Noik had already started cooking breakfast, which Hinata and Tenyo quickly volunteered to help with. Because there were so many of them, breakfast was served out on the back terrace overlooking the lake. When Hinata and Sasami sat down on either side of him, he gave them both quick pecks on the cheeks, causing them to blush and a few giggles to burst free around the table. He had to hold back a grin when Tenchi gave him a deadpan stare as Ryoko and Ayeka turned looks on him. He knew Tenchi was a lot more reserved than he was, which was seen with his rather calm nature. The girls all knew it, but he was still doing his part rather subtly to get Tenchi to climb a bit more out of his shell with the girls. A few hours later found Naruto alongside Tenyo and Tenchi sitting within a house in Masaki village. They were currently meeting with Aki Masaki, the eldest of Yosho's descendants on Earth and as such the village elder. Unlike himself, Tenchi and Tenyo, the elder woman, was a descendant of their grandfather's first wife Kasumi, as was every other person who lived in Masaki village. Though nowhere near the size of Konoha, the village was a fairly decent size, though composed of mostly women, as this branch of the Masaki clan seemed to birth girls in abundance. As for Aki, aside from being one of Lady Sito's former ladies-in-waiting, she had also been a teacher and had taken on those duties for their mothers when they were children. Listening to stories of what his mother as a chica had been like as a child from someone who was there to see it all helped somewhat fill the hole in his heart that his lack of knowing her had left. Hearing of the pranks that Achika and Kion had played had left him in stitches and gotten him to share some of his own stories with the older woman. "I may have to come visit this village of yours," said the elder, a soft smile on her face. "Really?" questioned Tenyo in surprise. "Yes. I've been thinking of my next move for a bit now, but that won't be for another few years," said Aki lightly. "Well, by then I'll be sure to have a place set aside for you, Oba-chan," said Naruto. "See that you do. I'd like to meet this third Hokage of yours. I'm sure he has a few stories about your childhood to share," said the elder before turning her attention to Tenchi, who stiffened. "What about you, Tenchi? When do you plan to get married?" questioned the woman, causing him to blush. "Seriously, isn't this a little early?" said Tenchi, causing her to shake her head. "Now that the old man is finally coming out of hiding, things will be changing. Everyone knows you are his heir, which means you'll be introduced to the universe at large as such. I'd prefer you marry those girls of yours before then, or at least have the arrangement in place," said Aki. "You know, I actually think Yugo-chan has a bit of a crush on you too," said Naruto, causing Tenchi to whip his head in his direction. "Why?" demanded Tenchi. "Do I look like I pay attention when the girls are gossiping?" questioned Naruto, causing Tenchi to drop his head while Tenyo giggled to herself. "Naruto, we'd like for you to marry Tenyo as well," said Aki. "Oba!" exclaimed Tenyo in shock, while Tenchi and Naruto were both looking at her with wide eyes. "Well, if you don't want, I can always ask Tsukiko. She's a bit upset she missed the boat with Tenchi," said Aki. No, Oba, I was just surprised," said Tenyo, blushing. "This one and Tsukiko have had a bit of a rivalry since they were little schoolgirls. You put a couple babies in her and those two will be right back at it," said Aki, grinning. "It's not that serious, Oba," said Tenyo lowly, still blushing. "Who's Tsukiko?" questioned Naruto. "Kiriko. San's mother," said Tenchi. "While I already know Ayeka and Sasami, I'd like to meet the rest of the girls," said Aki. "We'll arrange it," said Tenyo, managing to calm herself. On the other side of space, on the small planet of Furia, the Sandame Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen could be seen sitting behind the Hokage's desk. The wedding of Sunade and Jiraiya had been a small and quiet affair, the end result of which had seen him once more in the office while his old students were off on their honeymoon. The time he'd spent in his second retirement, though brief for him, had been enough to give him a bit of a recharge. Thankfully, Sunade would be returning soon enough, as they'd only cleared her for 3 months. As far as he knew, she and Jiraiya had gone to some vacation planet that Fanaho Dono had recommended them to. Theirs, however, wasn't the only marriage that had happened in the last stretch of time, as Asuma and Kurenai had finally done the deed themselves shortly after their students had made Chunin. Kakashi hadn't been far behind them and had married Masaki Minaho, which he imaged Kushina would have been thrilled about. He himself had been offered a revitalization by the Jiraians for his caring for Naruto but had turned it down. He had explained only to the two queens and Lady Seto that he was both too old to want to live that long and more importantly looking forward to reuniting with his wife in the afterlife. Of course, before that day came he was going to do some traveling, perhaps go to Earth and spend some time with his adoptive grandson to add to his training. That, however, would be for later. Currently his thoughts were focused solely on Konoha, as while Sunade hadn't officially been Hokage for long, the things she had done had been effective. For starters, she'd begun her long-wished-for medic program, and academy students who showed a strong aptitude or a willingness to learn those arts were placed within that learning program. The academy's curriculum had seen a complete overhaul, as well as it was no longer a mostly theory-based course load. She had taken the basic chakra control exercises such as tree climbing and water walking and added those to the academy curriculum, as well as teamwork assignments. In all honesty, the way things looked by the time the students emerged from the academy as genin, they would be much better equipped than they had been over the last decade. There were also plans for when they joined the greater galaxy, but those would have to wait until things were sorted out here first. Still, it was nice to know how the world would progress when the major criminal elements were eliminated. The political situation on their planet would also need to be settled before they could venture further out. Lady Seto had made it plain to them that there were just too many rulers and the planet would need to be unified. The daimyo had of course all balked at losing even a bit of power, and had balked even more when they learned that they themselves would be unqualified to rule the entirety of the planet. She had made it plain that all of them were simply too weak. The real power resided with the cages of the elemental nations. The problem with that was that a cage was incredibly busy, and adding more to their plates would be unthinkable. They knew they would need to come up with a new title, but as of now that was on hold. Currently they had teams of shinobi they had sent out to explore the rest of the planet, which was currently unmapped, as they had no idea what other people or resources were out there, if any existed at all. He knew, however, that he would not see the end goal, not in his lifetime, and that it may even be another 100 years or so before it happened, but he was at peace with that. He was an old man after all, and those were problems for someone else. Instead, he would be content to enjoy his retirement by spending his time with his remaining family. After that he could die happy and be able to tell it all to Bawako Chan when they finally met again. Sunade had given up on the idea of marriage. She had tried once and had even been engaged to Shizun's uncle Dan, only for him to die within 2 weeks of their engagement. With Dan's death she had just given up, not just on marriage but on life in general. Soon after she quit the shinobi life, had taken Shizun on as an apprentice and left Konoha behind her. She had spent 2 decades traveling the elemental nations, and she would admit she'd been aimless after Shizun had finished her training. Thankfully Shizun had stuck with her even after that until they returned to Konoha after receiving her sensei's message. It was actually talking to the Edo Tensei revived form of her grandfather that had gotten her out of her funk and thinking about life again. She had started living again soon after and had even become Hokage, allowing her to push forth measures that would help her achieve her old goal of having a medic assigned to every shinobi team. Even then she had given up on the idea of marriage. After all, despite being the last of the Senju, she was also an older woman well past her childbearing age. As such, she knew that while plenty of men may want to sleep with her, no one would marry her. At least that had been her assumption, but Jiraiya had surprised her with his proposal. She had at first thought it was another of his jokes and gotten a bit annoyed until he'd explained his reasoning, and she realized he was serious. The fact was, logically they were perfect for each other. Neither had ever married and both had serious jobs that would put a strain on a regular relationship. Jiraiya and Naruto had returned to Konoha for the sole purpose of their wedding, which had been a small thing and included only the clan heads, the small remnants of her Senju family, and their old sensei, who as Sandaime Hokage had presided over it. After the wedding, she and Jiraiya, along with Sakura, her parents Mebuki and Kazashi, along with Naruto, all been swiftly taken from Furia by Lady Seto and taken to Jerai. Once there, the 3 of them who'd never been had been introduced to a number of people from both the Masaki and Tatsuki clans. That was when she learned about body enhancements, which were a combination of medical and technological enhancements to the body done by what they called nanotechnology. It was one of the reasons they were so taken with Furians, as thanks to chakra their body's physicality could match a level 2 galactic enhancement naturally. The downside, however, was that the natural enhancement they had did not slow their aging or extend their lifespans. She had gotten a lot of data for the medical side of the procedure about what and how it changed the body and had determined that it would be a project that she could work on alongside her apprentices. She knew already that it would require extensive knowledge of both anatomy and fuinjutsu to be completed though. Still, she and Jiraiya had both gotten a level 1 Jiraiyan enhancement and the results had been staggering. The most obvious thing it had done was restore their youth, since her actual age of 27 matched the delusion she had been maintaining about herself. Jiraiya had also seen significant improvements in his physical capabilities, to the point where he was physically stronger than he had been even in his prime. Jiraiya looked much the same as he had in his late 20s. Their chakra was also easier to control, and as if that weren't enough, their senses had greatly expanded. Despite these increases, they didn't need any additional training because, in contrast to most patients undergoing similar procedures, their bodies were already highly trained. All they needed to do was tone things down, which they did in less than 2 hours. She had permitted Kazashi and Kakashi to go through the processes after the two of them. The real surprise was with Kakashi, even though Kazashi's results were comparable to the other two, except for the aging. The Sharingan was a surprise since it seemed the nanobots had somehow blended the Sharingan DNA with his own, making it a perfect fit for his body, even though the majority of the results had been the same. As a result, the eye became visible in both of his eyes, and their original red background gave way to a gray one with black tomo markings. The only thing that was different, in Kakashi's opinion, was that it required a lot less chakra than before. She didn't let anything else get done after that because she wanted to use the information to develop their own procedure. Shortly afterward, they departed from Jerai and arrived on Earth, where she and Jiraiya were currently relishing their honeymoon on the white sand beaches of a location known as the Bahamas. They had a small space all to themselves, and it gave them a peek of a typical domesticated civilian life. Growing up during a period of war, she had to admit that she had never felt so carefree in her entire life. As such, she was relishing the chance to unwind. She found out that Jiraiya had dated quite a few people during their time apart, and it was evident from the way he played with her body. She had also become quite eager for his touch as she'd gone without for a long time and her hormones were elevated to a level she hadn't felt in decades. She was currently unwinding in a hammock and basking in the sun. An hour prior, Jiraiya had applied a barrier seal that rendered this entire area invisible to others and established a boundary that caused people to inadvertently avoid it. It included the water for at least 8 feet out from the house as well as the beach. Although he had mentioned that there would be some adult scenes, Jiraiya was currently writing a book with a plot and character development rather than just another brazen smut book, and she was okay with that. She turned to face herself and sighed in satisfaction. She knew that she would soon have to return to Konoha and resume her responsibilities, but for the time being, she was happy to savor their little piece of paradise. In the meantime, Washu's lab was once more home to Naruto. He was meant to be taking a break from training, but he was never able to do that fully, so he was currently working with her on developing some of his other skills. Over the years, he had learned a lot of skills from Washu, including how to make an energy sword out of his own energy and energy shields without the need for a key like his mother's bracer. She had also taught him how to create them using the same energy as his Lighthawk wings, a process she called material metamorphosis, which required him to change them into solid matter. Over the course of their time together, she had also taught him other small skills like flight and teleportation. But he felt like he was cheating by using Lighthawk energy, so he confided in her that he wanted to figure out how to do it with chakra. He also sensed that that was the day their relationship had changed. Thus far, the pair had fashioned a few chakra swords that were inspired by the Raijin no Ken and the Tenchi Ken. The swords were powered by an application chakra, just like the Raijin no Ken, but they had the metallic hilt design and construction of the Star Wars lightsabers. Naturally, the blades on these were composed of pure energy, just like the Tenchi Ken, and they were as durable, so unlike the Raijin no Ken, they could not be broken by using force. Jiraiya and his grandparents were the only people who, aside from the two of them, were aware of them thus far. Yosho and his grandmother Miyako had examined them with the eyes of a warrior and assisted in determining their usefulness. His grandmother Miyako actually blushed when Irie, who had also been there that day, gave him a big hug and started giggling about how they were going to be wealthy and never have to worry about the demon again. It would take him some time to discover that the demon was, in fact, his great-aunt Ringo Tatsuki, the head of Jiraiya's accounting division and the elder sister of Miyako. Nothing was that powerful, of course, but the lightsaber was nowhere near as strong as the Lighthawk sword. Tenchi Ken, A master key that derived its power from Fanaho was more powerful than the lightsaber in terms of power as well. Tenchi. Ken could control most other ships and form a single Lighthawk wing into a shield because it was connected to a first generation royal tree. Its sword blade was also formed of Lighthawk energy, albeit it wasn't as strong as a real Lighthawk sword. Still, the lightsabers were very helpful, and Heir persuaded them to make a version that didn't require chakra to activate. Apart from that, he had been attempting to master flight with Washu. Even though Tenchi and Ayeka were able to fly, they acknowledged that their approach wasn't what he was looking for. Naruto desired the ability to feel the wind blowing around him and the freedom to adjust his speed as he pleased. Jiraiya had hypothesized about using wind chakra, but he believed that would resemble gliding or riding the currents of the wind rather than truly flying. In fact, the ex-pirate had acknowledged in a conversation with Ryoko that she possessed the skill and was fully aware of what he was discussing. She could not teach him, but she had acknowledged that her gems controlled her energy and abilities, so it was probably an issue of energy control. That had led him to pursue additional chakra control exercises, delaying his flight plans. That left them with their ongoing teleportation project. This one was harder because it required him to create a method, but it was also easier because it was extremely complex. His father's Hiraishin no Jutsu was learned, and he then studied Fuinjutsu further. Fortunately, Kage Bunshin made learning Fuinjutsu much simpler than it was meant to be, and he was now proficient enough to be able to decipher a seal in a matter of minutes just by looking at it. It had been much more difficult for him to learn how to create seals because he had to essentially relearn how to write, which he had taught himself. As a result, his calligraphy was much worse. After a great deal of time and a great deal of clones correcting him, he was actually pretty far along in his studies of Uzumaki sealing, which involved making seals with pure chakra rather than a medium like ink. Compared to Naruto, Washu found the study to be easier. She knew that chakra was a weakened form of her own energy because, as one of the Chosen, she was capable of many things. Because this energy could manipulate this dimension with far less consequences than her own, she had learned how to use it. Chakra had previously consumed the fruit of the tree and was now pursuing all of the energy that had formerly been the Shinju. She didn't understand that chakra was a form of body enhancement until she learned how to use it on her own. She learned the shadow clone technique from Naruto, and once she got the hang of it, it not only helped her with her work but also taught her how to seal things. They discovered at this time that seals could be made with any energy. The energy used to create the seal, however, would be required to activate it. They also discovered that Fuinjutsu didn't actually require chakra. Since chakra was born from a high-level existence and therefore contained a dimensional component, it was the best energy. Nevertheless, Naruto is now standing anxiously next to the woman in Washu's lab while hidden behind a glass shield. A blonde clone stood in front of them, sulking as it worried about the current test, just like the original did. Unlike its creator, though, it was aware that it had to be the sacrificial lamb in this case. Right then, let's get to it. Washu said, eagerly rubbing her hands together. Nay, Washu. Chan, couldn't we test this some other way? Hesitantly asked the clone. Oh no, you're ideal for this. The brilliant scientist said, you're a clone, so even if it messes up you won't feel any pain as you'll dispel before you can feel anything, to which Naruto snorted. Hiraishin test 1. Let's go. Yelled Naruto. The clone formed the confrontation seal and scowled at his creator before vanishing for a short while. Washu frowned as Naruto abruptly flinched backward and cursed. What could have happened? Asked Washu. It fell into lava after traveling through the incorrect kind of dimension. We want the dimension to be a void, correct? The blonde said. Yes, that means you'll need to try one of the other jutsu formulas. Washu also scowled as she spoke. Man, I wish I could use the same jutsu formula my dad did. Naruto said, scowling. It is not a concern. Failure is expected at this early stage of the trial. Declared Washu. Yes, that is the reason I developed so many distinct formulas. Even so, it was a lava sea. Naruto shook his head and said. This explains the use of shadow clones. At least your father gave you that advice, even though he didn't leave you with a jutsu formula. Declared Washu. Naruto exclaimed, right, number 2, you're up. As he turned to face a group of clones who were glaring at each other while standing in a line similar to a queue. Even those far away and unable to hear Washu's cackles shuddered in terror as her cackles reverberated throughout the lab.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.